BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Alan Smith. Good evening. Boris Johnson, the front-runner in the Conservative leadership contest, is facing charges that he lied during the EU referendum campaign about the amount of money Britain sends to Brussels. The US Special Counsel Robert Mueller, in his first public comments on his investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election, has declined to clear President Trump of obstruction of justice. Mr. Trump responded by saying he thought the matter was closed. The inquest into the London Bridge terror attack has heard that Oxford Street could have been the intended target. New research has revealed that spending on social care in England is much lower per head than in other parts of the United Kingdom. A fraud trial has collapsed after a judge decided that the expert prosecution witness had little or no understanding of the case. Boris Johnson has been told he must appear in court to face allegations that he lied during the Brexit referendum campaign. The case centres around what became a cornerstone of the argument put forward by Vote Leave, that exiting the EU would free up £350 million a week, which could instead be spent on the NHS. Today, a district judge at Westminster Magistrates Court ruled that the accusations against the former Foreign Secretary of misconduct in public office should be heard by the Crown Court. A source close to Mr Johnson dismissed the case as a politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit and said it wasn't the role of criminal law to regulate political speech. Andy Moore reports.
Lawyers for Marcus Ball had alleged at a previous hearing that Mr Johnson knowingly and repeatedly lied to the public in claiming that £350 million was sent by the United Kingdom to the EU every week. It was a claim famously writ large on the side of the Vote Leave campaign bus. Mr Johnson faces 3 counts of misconduct. 1 count relates to his role as an MP, another to his position as Mayor of London. They date to between February and June 2016 in the run-up to the referendum. The 3rd count is for the period April to May 2017, around the time of the last general election. On his website, Mr Ball, who's 29, says he's a writer and speaker who has previously worked to reform higher education in the UK. He's been working full-time on this case since June 2016. Mr Ball claims his campaign is not politically motivated. He says he wants to challenge the national problem of lying in British politics. So far, he's believed to be well on his way to raising the £500,000 he needs to finance the private prosecution. This afternoon, Mr Ball's lawyer, Giles Bright, issued this statement with his client standing alongside him.
The summons should, subject to the court's availability, be issued within the next few days, after which it will be served on Mr Johnson. The charges against Mr Johnson are indictable only, which means that any trial will be in a Crown Court.
Judge Margot Coleman said she was not making any findings of fact and the allegations were unproven. But she did give the go-ahead for the case to continue. She said there was prima facie evidence that Mr Johnson knew his statements were false. She said Mr Johnson would have to answer the charges at Magistrates Court and the case would then be sent to the Crown Court for trial.
The decision to begin court proceedings against Mr Johnson has been taken at a politically sensitive time, just as he's beginning his campaign to become Conservative leader and replace Theresa May as Prime Minister. It's also led some politicians to raise questions about their ability to speak freely in the run-up to elections. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, has been considering the impact of the ruling at Westminster.
Today's decision has already prompted a furious response from those close to Boris Johnson, an indication perhaps of just how damaging this court case could yet prove to his leadership ambitions. The former Foreign Secretary was expected to launch his campaign within days, a launch which will now take place against a backdrop of difficult headlines about Mr Johnson's conduct and his use of the controversial claim that the UK sent the EU £350 million a week, a figure that many believe was central to the success of the Leave campaign. It also opens up the possibility that Mr Johnson could find himself in the dock, literally, and facing a potential prison sentence at precisely the moment he's seeking support to become Prime Minister. Inevitably, it'll also provide Mr Johnson's numerous political foes, both inside and outside the Tory party, with ammunition to raise questions about his character and suitability for high office. This evening, however, in a furious response to the court ruling, a source close to Mr Johnson condemned the prosecution as a politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit and crush the will of the people. And this was the response of one of Mr Johnson's key backers, the Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg.
It is a grave error to try and use the legal process to settle political questions. The issue at hand is whether it was right to use the gross or the net level of our contributions to the European Union. That's a matter of free speech and of the democratic process, and this court case is fundamentally ill-judged and improper.
Today's case may not change the views of those Tory MPs and party members who already have a fixed opinion about Mr Johnson. The concern for his team, however, must be that it might shape the views of the uncommitted and reinforce a belief that electing Boris Johnson as leader represents a risk. Tory leadership contests rarely go according to plan, and this one may be no exception.
A date has yet to be set for the case against Mr Johnson, but it's likely to be heard after the Conservative leadership contest. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons looks at what's likely to happen next.
The charge is misconduct in public office, deployed for the first time in the context of a political argument. Boris Johnson's appearance in the Magistrates' Court would be brief, because this is a charge which must be heard in a Crown Court in front of a jury. There, the prosecution would have to prove he lied about EU spending and deliberately abused the trust in him as a public official. But the district judge who considered the allegation in the Magistrates' Court has already decided there is a case to answer, though as yet it is unproven. A key issue will be whether the former Foreign Secretary was in a public office at the time he made these comments, or just involved in parallel political campaigning, exercising his freedom of speech. Lawyers for Marcus Ball say he was Mayor of London. He regarded leaving the EU as his formal policy and signed several official letters to that end. The case is complicated by the fact that this is a private prosecution, which could be halted at any point by the Crown Prosecution Service. More likely is that Boris Johnson, a candidate for party leader and possible Prime Minister, fights a legal battle through the courts to prevent a trial ever happening.
The man who led the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, and whether there was any collusion or obstruction on the part of Donald Trump, has declined to clear him of acting illegally. The president had claimed Robert Mueller's report, which was released in redacted form last month, amounted to a complete exoneration. However, in his first public comments, Mr Mueller stated that if he'd been confident that the president clearly did not commit a crime, he would have said so. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
Washington is a city where people race to be in front of a microphone. But for 2 years, the special counsel Robert Mueller has chosen silence while he completed his report on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. That changed dramatically today when he spoke publicly about his investigation. He said that agents of the Russian state had systematically sought to damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. And crucially, he had this to say about whether Donald Trump had obstructed justice in his attempts to thwart the investigation, one of the high crimes and misdemeanors that can lead to impeachment.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional.
This is a clip that will be played and replayed. The special counsel saying, in effect, the president is escaping prosecution on a technicality. And if we thought he was innocent, we'd have said so. Donald Trump sees it differently. He has tweeted that because there was insufficient evidence, he is innocent. A very big difference in interpretation. Donald Trump has repeatedly sought to characterise the Mueller report with 4 words: perfect bumper sticker length, no collusion, no obstruction. Robert Mueller begs to differ, and finally, out loud.
The inquest into the London Bridge terror attack has heard that Oxford Street may have been the initial target before the plan was changed en route. 8 people were killed and 48 injured when Khurram Butt, Rashid Redwan and Youssef Zagba drove their van into pedestrians on the bridge before stabbing people in Borough Market in June 2017. From the Old Bailey, Richard Lister reports.
One of the most chilling pieces of evidence shown at the inquest today was an image of a mobile phone recovered from the attacker's van on the night they struck. On the screen were directions to Oxford Street, one of the busiest places in central London. Acting Detective Chief Inspector Wayne Jolly told the court it was possible that the decision to target London Bridge may only have been taken as the 3 men approached the area. CCTV footage showed them apparently lost and having to turn around at one point, and they were shown driving back and forth across the bridge immediately before they began to target pedestrians. In the 2 hours of video played in court was further evidence that the attack could have been even worse than it was. Video from a Lidl supermarket in East London showed Redwan buying the 12-inch ceramic knives used in the attacks in Borough Market, but also a number of wine bottles, which were later found in the van, having been turned into petrol bombs. None of the 13 bombs was ever used, but the court heard they were viable. Also shown was evidence that Khurram Butt had tried to rent a 7.5-ton lorry for the attack, failing only because the rental office